It appears Canada's top trade officials have wrapped up talks in Washington this week. Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc posted this, saying, well, in Washington this week, Canada's chief trade negotiator to the United States, the Honourable Janice Charette, and I had a comprehensive meeting with my counterpart, Ambassador Jameson Greer, the United States Trade Representative. We agreed to remain in close contact and continue working together. Also this week, we learned Canada is rolling back that so-called Netflix tax, the fee that U.S. streamers had to pay towards Canadian content. Prime Minister Mark Carney was asked today whether that was a concession to the U.S. in trade talks.
How should Canadians interpret that decision when Minister LeBlanc and Canadian officials are at an event yesterday co-sponsored?
We made that decision 2 months ago. That's how they should. We made that decision with a focus on affordability. When we see costs increase because of a decision from the federal family, broadly speaking, arm's length regulator, but from the federal family, for something that, you know, most Canadians have one or two or so of these streamers, and it's real money. This stuff adds up.
Well, time now for the Power Panel. Amanda Varro is a former Liberal Party communications strategist. Jordan Likeness is a former NDP strategist, and in our Ottawa studio, Tim Powers has worked as a strategist for Conservative parties. I'll start with you. If this was made 2 months ago, and take him at his word, did they just do a lousy job of communicating? Because it sure looks like a concession.
Listen, not since Chrystia Freeland gave us Liberty when she canceled her Disney Plus has there been something so substantial as this, Peter. We're now canceling the Netflix tax. They haven't done a great job of communicating policy changes that could be of political benefit to them. This should be of political benefit to them with more people than will be angry. So you would think, much like the management of the communication around the bridge, they get ahead of it as opposed to being caught in, oh, are you conceding? Because that are you conceding, which he may very well be doing, is not the way you want the story to go. You want the story to be, I'm cutting a break for Canadians. Right. I just saw the thing go up and I'm doing it here. And if it helps us, excuse me, with the U.S., that is great. So concession, no concession, I don't know. If they knew for 2 months, they might have wanted to tell people earlier, because also what happens during the summer is kids are at home, families are at home, people are binge watching programs. Why not get the political credit for it? So there are more flags being raised about how they communicate things. Doesn't seem to have a material effect on the Prime Minister, but it would be something I'd want to look at.
So, Jordan, take out the concession, not concession. Is it the right move? I'm not sure she can hear. So, Amanda, I'll ask you the same question. Is it the right move regardless of the messaging around it?
Yeah, I think it is the right move. And I think it's the right move probably for either reason. If it's a concession, right, it's probably the right move. If it's really about affordability, fair, right move. And for all the reasons that Tim just said, I mean, these are services that many families enjoy, most families enjoy, and they don't just enjoy one or two, they enjoy more than that, but they're costly services. So, but I also agree with Tim on the point that he makes about communication. This could actually be a win for the Carney government to talk about it from an affordability standpoint. So you saw the Prime Minister indicate that in his remarks today, but they could have really sort of made it more of a campaign style message. You know, you're at home, these things matter, the entertainment between you and your family matters. We know these costs are significant, substantial for you. You know, we don't want to put those dollars on you. I think that message could have worked well with Canadians. Unfortunately, it tends to feel a little bit like after the fact, and the after the fact is what ends up tripping them up.
Yeah, Jordan, I'm not sure what you're able to hear from these two, but the idea that it was largely a communications mishap, that right or wrong, this is probably the right move, but that they were unable to sort of capitalize on communicating to Canadians that it was something good for us at home. How do you, what do you tell a government that has sort of let that moment slip by?
Well, I'm not sure that this is just a communications problem. I think that there is also a factual problem here, which is that we've seen time and again every attempt that Canada has made to give preemptive concessions to the Americans in this trade war has not really resulted in any tangible benefit. And I think that we're seeing the timing of this announcement, of course, just as Dominic LeBlanc was wrapping up the trade talks in Washington. So obviously it's part of those negotiations. But so far, we haven't seen any real benefits come from the preemptive concessions that Canadians have made. And, you know, you can look back to the distant past, last October, when the Canadian government was assuring people that Canadian culture wasn't going to be on the table in these trade negotiations. But of course, we can actually see now that it's very much on the table. In fact, we've made more concessions when it comes to digital media than in almost any other sector so far. So this has real consequences for the industry here in Canada that go, I think, well beyond a communications problem for the government. These are Canadian jobs. And ultimately, these types of fees were in place from profitable American streamers in order to support Canadian culture and the Canadian media and film and television industry here. And so that's a big loss, I think.
Can I, Jordan's onto a key point, because there have been two big areas where the current Carney government has gone against, arguably, its constituency. The Stephen Guilbeault issue on the environment and the pipeline and other things that were done there. And this, for a very long time, as we all know, the Liberals have counted on support from a lot of the cultural community, particularly in Quebec and Ontario. And that community often, not homogeneously, but certainly a large number of them, have always seen this, albeit new, as a stream to help them create content. So, you know, Mark Carney is doing things now that I think the broad public like, but some of these key constituencies, it's going to be interesting to see what this CAMCOM payment is going to be, and if that assuages the concerns of people who the Liberals have been able to count on for years and who are big fans of this Netflix tax.
And I mean, Amanda, it's interesting that we're going from getting, to Jordan's point, big American, profitable American companies paying for Canadian content, to now Canadian taxpayers hopefully paying at least for the same amount of Canadian content. Doesn't that put Canadian, like, CTVs and private corporations in Canada that are paying that CanCon tax at a disadvantage?
Yeah, I think to a certain degree it does. But I also think, and listen, this happens all the time with public policy decisions. You're weighing two sides, right? You're weighing the affordability measures, the costs, you're weighing a reaction from the public, and you're deciding whether the decisions that you make are in the public interest or not. Somebody's going to be a winner, somebody's going to be a loser. That's the way many of these decisions end up falling. What I think this government has done pretty well, though, is that even if there are parts of the party that, you know, maybe more desire this more than others, they're not making decisions just based on that. I think they really do take a broader public interest into mind. And nobody's going to dispute the fact that things are more expensive right now. Nobody's going to dispute the fact that it's tougher for families in their household right now. So to put affordability at the forefront, I don't think that's a bad thing for this government at this particular stage.
Just to put a line under this, Tyler up in the control room has just sent me that in June, Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture Mark Miller did tell us here on Power Politics that the government is asking CRTC to walk back that decision. CP reported. So it was out there. But like, I don't work in Ottawa full time. I certainly was caught by surprise when I saw that and thought, wow, that's news. And I think most Canadians would as well. And I think that's where we get into the sort of messaging of it all. The other big messaging thing that came out today was Prime Minister Mark Carney saying last week that all options were on the table if U.S. President Donald Trump follows through on this threat to impose 50% tariffs next month. But this week, Carney appears to be taking energy, at least, off the table as he considers retaliatory measures.
Being a reliable supplier is important. Canadians are reliable. Canadians can be trusted. When you're a supplier of a key commodity, key service, you got to think really hard about not supplying. So that very much colors it. So look, this is incredibly diverse country, economy. We have many things we can do. First and foremost is to work towards an agreement. That's what we're going to do. But there's other things we can do if we needed to.
Tim, it's a tough spot because a lot of people are saying use whatever leverage you have. Our best point of leverage is obviously our energy exports, and yet he makes a point about the last thing you want to do is undermine our burgeoning, very brand new reputation as somebody who can deliver energy to the world.
Well, never mind that. It's filling, if you're an oil-producing province, the cash is flowing in big time.
It's the only thing keeping the economy going.
It's because of what's happening in the Mideast. And there's also the interesting politics on this, too. So Alberta, obviously, and Saskatchewan, heavily conservative areas. Alberta, referendum coming or a question about whether there will be a referendum in October. Do you want to cut off their oil then? Quebec, hydropower, which they get from Newfoundland and Labrador, as I should remind you.
Yes, they do.
Also a huge supplier to the U.S., also an election coming, also a potential referendum. I think it's both smart not to put this on the table for economic and political reasons. I do think if we put that on the table right now, it would cause more harm in Canada than benefit in the U.S. And I think it's probably wise for him, if he is not going to put it on the table, to stop the mystery around it, because there was some mystery coming out of Charlottetown
some clarity
as to whether we go that way. So going into the fall with the election in Quebec and the referendum question in Alberta, you don't want that stuff percolating, because that drives those economies.
And Jordan, it feels, certainly from the outside, like I live in Toronto, I'm not in the bubble in Ottawa. It feels like there's only one option, which is using all leverage and cutting off all exports to the United States and, retaliatory tariffs or nothing at all. But there's a bunch of stuff in between. Canadian consumers buy a ton of American goods and can scale that back. We've seen the impact of not buying U.S. booze. We've seen the impact of not being a tourist in the United States. That's having a real effect on those sort of economies that are centered around those.
Absolutely. And in some sense, it's a bit of a false debate to say that either everything's on the table or none of these things are on the table. Instead, it's a gradient. There's a whole series of tools that the Prime Minister and the Premiers have available to them that they may or may not want to use. But leverage is only leverage if you're willing to use it. So I think it's no accident that the Prime Minister had a different response today standing beside Danielle Smith in Alberta than we saw in previous days. And of course, there has been a lot of resistance to the idea of putting energy on the table for the reasons the Prime Minister cited. But there are many other things that Canada has that the U.S. needs: critical minerals, potash. And as you said, Peter, the things that are most irritating to the Americans right now are the alcohol ban and the fact that Canadians are not traveling to the U.S. And I think, interestingly, those are both things that the federal government has really had nothing to do with, and are things that are primarily consumer boycotts. Even if the alcohol was put back on the shelves tomorrow, there's not a whole lot of Canadians who are going to buy that. So the U.S. really has a bigger problem when it comes to the biggest irritants that they're citing in the relationship, because that's about what choices Canadians are making in their own lives, not about government policy.
And Amanda, do we need to have this conversation now to be ready for August 19th if this goes ahead, or do we need to sort of lay low, wait and see what happens on August 19th and respond in kind when it comes, if it comes?
Well, I think what happened today was revealing, because it exposed where his red line is, and I think that's interesting. I think that sends a signal not just to Washington but to future partners as well. Like, he's drawing a distinction between retaliation and reliability. He's saying that it's more important to have long-term credibility than to use this as a short-term bargaining chip. And he is sending a signal, which is to say we want to be known as a dependable energy supplier here and elsewhere. So I think, and I also, to the point that was made earlier, it sends a clear domestic message as well. So of course you see Premier Danielle Smith in the background. It's not surprising that this has been solidified. One last point that I'll make, and we've been making it over the last couple of weeks, is I agree with what Jordan said. Tim may have mentioned it as well. There were things that felt smaller at first. The LCBO felt like a smaller bargaining chip, ended up being a big one. So I do think that what we're delivering, or what the signals that he's sending out, is also, we have a lot to put in the table. We have a lot to bargain with. There's more tools here. But again, the red line has now been revealed, and I think that can give some stability to those markets as well.
All right. I want to pivot to the political tension between the federal and Ontario governments over these two major projects. On Friday, the feds rejected Ontario's plan to expand the Toronto Billy Bishop Airport. Now, several members of Premier Doug Ford's government are speaking out about Ottawa's proposed high-speed rail project. Take a listen here to the federal transport minister speaking about the spat earlier today.
I think building major infrastructure projects will always come with their share of concerns that we have to listen very carefully to. I'm very confident as we move on that not that there won't be controversy, not that there won't be concerns, of course, but that this is a project that makes Canadians dream, that will improve their life, will improve their mobility, their ability to go from city to city, from place to place, and enjoy moving more quickly through what is a very large geography.
Amanda, I'm not entirely sure I understand how you sell this without when you've got the Ontario MPPs pushing back against it so hard.
Well, the interesting thing, this comes after the Billy Bishop saga. So it was really, and I think, what many of us are thinking is, are we making infrastructure decisions based on retaliation, like you won't support me, so I won't support you? Or are we making them based on true public need? Because the irony is that both of those projects, a Billy Bishop expansion or high-speed rail, really address the same problem, and that's transporting people more quickly through one of the most congested corridors between Toronto and Ottawa, Montreal and Quebec City. So the objective remains the same, but I think part of the message that the Carney government was sending as it related to Billy Bishop may have been that, yes, they're pro-infrastructure, but not at all costs. At the same time, they want this project to move forward, the Alto project, and they want the support, obviously, of the province. But I think that what they don't want is to have this war of words between them and the province based on, like, you're going to be going through my backyard and I'm just retaliating on you because you wouldn't support the Billy Bishop expansion. I think that there's a lot more we're going to hear on this.
Jordan, they were getting along so well. Kate McKenna was in here yesterday breaking this and reminding me that the Prime Minister and Doug Ford had a sleepover, for goodness sakes.
That's right.
It
wasn't so long ago.
How has this come apart at the seams so quickly?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I think the whole thing is pretty cynical on both sides. There's really a clear quid pro quo here where there was going to be an exchange of support for projects that are in some way politically unpopular with certain segments of each of those governing parties' voter bases. But the idea was that they were going to exchange that and get through it together. But of course, the timing of the federal government's announcement of opposition to the Billy Bishop Airport expansion is quite suspect. It comes just 2 days before the announcement of the by-election in Beaches, East York. So clearly, the federal Liberals made a determination that that was going to be a really toxic issue for them in that by-election, and they wanted to get it off the table. And so now the fact that you're seeing Ontario PC MPPs, and actually not just MPPs, a couple of ministers were involved in that letter that was sent out. This is a pretty clear message from Premier Ford to Mark Carney that he doesn't like that the Prime Minister went back on what was apparently an agreement between them. I think that for most Canadians watching this unfold, it is pretty cynical. This is really, regardless of what you think about the individual projects, it's not the way we would like to imagine that politicians decide what goes ahead and what doesn't go ahead. That should be based on many other factors other than political benefit for different parties.
And yet, Tim, this, like, if I could have bet on Polymarket or whatever the prediction things are, that this would fall apart, that this was the most predictable falling apart of a project. There is no high-speed rail project that doesn't hit something in its early stage.
Yeah,
we've been talking about this my whole life.
Since we were kids, yeah, and that's, I mean, that is yesterday, of course, but they've been going on forever. But on the airport, adding to Jordan's theory of cynicism before we hit the break here, I mean, we do have these August 31st dates, of course, the by-election in Beaches, East York. That will pass. Isn't there a big investment conference in Toronto in September? And I can't imagine some of those global investors are going to enjoy landing at Pearson and waiting an hour and a half in their cars to get down there. And then maybe after they hear some of the whining the Prime Minister hears, he and Doug Ford might find, oh, we can maybe look at this
maybe there
again.
Is a deal. Well, I mean, it's interesting that you don't need the full expansion to land some jets there, right? Like, this isn't, again, an all or nothing sort of deal. Amanda, is there a path forward for either project, for expanding something at the island and getting some rail project done?
Yes, of course there is. This wouldn't be the first time that we've seen, a government say, quote unquote, no, or they don't have the support to a project and then invite a different proposal. I think that there's, probably a smaller modernization plan for the airport that addresses in a bigger way some of the valid concerns that Torontonians have, whether that's around noise or this once in a generation public space or housing, quality of life. So do I think that they'll get there in some capacity? I do. I totally do.
Jordan, last word to you. We have like 25 seconds. Do they get something done on rail at least?
Well, I mean, I would say with respect to the airport, the cynical among us would note that the province is not giving the land back to the city of Toronto.
That is very worth pointing out. Yeah.
There is certainly a lot of space being left for that decision to be revisited. So I don't expect that this is the last that we're going to hear of this by any stretch.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks to you all. This was a lot of fun. The Power Panel is Tim Powers, Amanda Alvaro, and Jordan Likeness.